Uh-oh. Some nearby neighbors moved away. Now who's coming here to stay? Welcome back to Deep in Bear Country, a Berenstain Bearcast. I am your host, Phil Gonzalez, and this week, let me just turn this off real quick. This week, we are covering a book. We're going back in time again, once again. Ooh, going back in time for a book that I've covered already. I've covered it twice. I've done 2 episodes on this shtick. I was going to say something else. I've done 2 episodes on this story, this book, this tale, this fable, and you've heard neither of them. You've heard none of it. You've heard none. The only way you've heard this episode is if you were in the audience for the first ever live show of Deep in Bear Country, a Berenstain Bearcast, and I guarantee you weren't unless you are one of like 8 people, because there weren't many people in that crowd. I did this book years ago in front of an audience with 3 guests, a whole panel of guests, experts on the subject, to talk about this book and the ins and outs of it as a social statement on what it's about. And it was great. It was lively. It was fun. It was funny. I had incredible guests and completely failed to press record on my recorder. I was so excited, so nervous, so scared, and so worked up. And it was like 10 a.m. on a Sunday that I forgot to record the entire thing. And so you had to have been there. You had to have been in the audience, in the crowd, in the drizzle of humanity in order to know whatever went on with that. And so later I was like, this is ridiculous. I wrote to all the guests and I was like, I'm so sorry that this happened. I would love to get together with each of you individually and interview you separately and then edit it together into an episode. And so I did. I went to their places of business. I went to one of their houses and I talked with them extensively about the subject matter of the book and never edited it together. I had the interviews and then I just never did anything with them. I sat on them and then the years went by and I was just depressed, I think, that I lost this episode. And so while sitting in my own depression, I lost 2 episodes because I decided not to release that either. Years went by and I just lost those files. They're gone. They're gone. So it's all gone. If it's in the air. You had to have been there, or you had to be like a supernatural ghost or a time traveler in order to enjoy that. And then as the years went on, people were like, "Are you ever going to cover this book?" And I was like, one day. And for a while, my intention was to make it the last book I ever covered. I was like, you know what? It's the lost episode. I'll make it the last thing I ever do. But then as I got older, I was like, I don't know if this is ever actually going to end. And then I was talking with Mike the other week about the books I have coming up. And I realized that it's getting harder and harder for me to avoid this book because there are books that like reflect on what this book is about. And there's actually a sequel of sorts to this book, and I've put it off long enough. And the only books coming up on our list are literally like St. Patrick's Day books, Easter. There's an Easter book coming up, Mother's Day, Father's Day, books that haven't been published, and then books that are a response to this. I have no choice but to finally cover this book. What is this book? You already know what it is. It's the Berenstain Bears New Neighbors. That's right. From 1990 something. From 1990 what? From 1994. 1994's The Berenstain Bears New Neighbors. This book occupies a wild place in popular culture. This book is the book that started interest in the Berenstain Bears having a podcast. This is the book, the cover of which was posted in a forum that I was part of a group on Facebook. And someone was like, check this out. And I wrote in and was like, well, as a matter of fact, what happens in this book is a reflection of blah, blah, blah. And it's not the first time the Bears ever encountered neighbors. And it's not the first, but it is the first example of, and I went off on this like weird screed about this book. And someone wrote into the thread and said, you should do a podcast about the Berenstain Bears. And I responded, I will. I will call it Deep in Bear Country, a Berenstain Bearcast, as a joke. And then a bunch of people wrote in and said, if you start a podcast about the Berenstain Bears, I will listen to it. And I said, all right, I will. And I did. And I don't know if those people ever listened to it. Honestly, if you were one of the people in that thread, let me know. You probably weren't, but if you were, let me know. I started the podcast. It still exists. It's been almost 10 years. In any case, the Berenstain Bears New Neighbors. It's also a very pertinent book in this day and age. And by this day and age, I mean like literally this day, today, as we see increased discrimination against our neighbors of different backgrounds, of different cultures. I just passed on the road the other day, a large, I won't say protest because it wasn't really protest. It was like a large protest looking gathering of people just there to spread positivity about our neighbors. And it said, we love our neighbors. We love our different neighbors. We love our neighbors, our immigrant neighbors. We love our neighbors of different colors and different races and different backgrounds and different religions. We love our neighbors. There's a local group that they get out there just to spread positivity. And there was this huge, they had banners and signs. And I was like, they love their neighbors. We really should love our neighbors, shouldn't we? Like there's literally a part in the Bible about that. When Jesus was talking, doing his thing on the mount, he was I think it was a lawyer came up to him. And this is in 3 of the Gospels, not John. John didn't have this in there. John is doing his own thing, his own like weird anti-Semitic thing. John is doing his own thing. One of the listeners comes up to Jesus and is like, hey buddy, you're talking a lot. Narrow it down. Like, what's the point? What's the deal with all this? You have to tell us one thing. What are we supposed to do? If you had to break all this down into one thing, what are we supposed to do? And so Jesus sitting up there and he's like, okay, look, if you have to make this simple, I'll say there's only one, there's one commandment that's important. Like that's the most important commandment. And he says it's love God as like above all else. Like just love God. Yada, yada, yada. But he's like, but there is a second one that's almost as important. It's the second most important commandment after just accept that there's this giant God up there. And that is love your neighbor as you love yourself. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. That's it. If you do those 2 things, you're golden. And he's directly referencing stuff from like the Hebrew texts, from Jewish texts. And that statement, just love God, love your neighbor as you love yourself, has been the most controversial, argued about line in the whole Bible. People are like, well, what does he mean? What's a neighbor? What does he mean, love your neighbor? Does he mean just people exactly like you? Probably he means just other Christians, right? Probably he means people who were born there, right? Probably he just means people you already like, right? Right? Like that kind of is what the debate seems to be. Like people just not wanting to love their neighbor. People just not wanting to accept that there are people different from them in their community. So they're like, Jesus doesn't want us to actually like other people, right? When he says love your neighbor as yourself, he means like just yourself, right? And like your kids. So the Berenstain Bears New Neighbors, not a religious book, by the way. This is not a religious book, but it is a book about a lot. And it's a meme. So what happens is you see this book quite a bit, or you used to see this book quite a bit, because the cover is the Bear family standing on their porch, looking across the street at another family that's moving into the house. And the other family is clearly a family of panda bears, which are not usually seen in Beartown. And they have a U-Haul that's all their stuff is in. And mom is smiling towards them. Brother's pointing at them with a smile on his face. Sister is smiling. And Papa Bear is standing with his arms crossed, literally giving them the side eye. And this cover gets posted a lot. And people are like, hey, did you know that there's a Berenstain Bears book where Papa Bear was totally a racist? And I'm like, yeah, that's literally what the book's about. Like, it's presented as if it's some sort of gotcha with the Berenstain Bears. So this is, of course, a Stan and Jan Berenstain book, 1994. Stan and Jan were still working on the books. And it's presented as if, and you see this a lot in like those collections of like worst album covers of all time, where they assume that the person who created the cover doesn't understand the point they're making, I guess. Like, we are so smart in 2025. We're the ones who understand what things look like, not the artists who did it. They don't realize that that it looks like Papa Bear's a racist. And no, it looks like Papa Bear is being racist because he is being racist. Like, it's literally a book about being racist towards your neighbors, being prejudiced, prejudging people based on what they look like, based on their, the things that they like that they do culturally, the foods they eat, the clothes they wear, the choices they make. And that's what it's literally what it's about. It's not shocking. Like, it's because that's what it's about. And the fact that they made Papa Bear the racist in this book, the fact that they made Papa Bear the one at fault, is one of the book's many strengths. Now, the book doesn't hit a home run on every point it's trying to make, like many of the social commentary books that the Berenstains did. They don't always knock one out of the park. It's sometimes a little screwy. Sometimes the point gets lost, but more or less, the book makes some really good points. And the strongest thing it does is allow Papa Bear to be the bad guy. If Papa wasn't the bad guy, if, say, they went the more obvious route, say they made Too Tall the bad guy, say, like, the bears are moving in across the street and Too Tall Grizzly was the one who was being weird and prejudiced and racist about it. You could do that. You could pull that off, but that establishes the idea, which we'll get into, that the racist, the person in the wrong in situations like this, is always going to be the jerk. It's always going to be the person you most suspect is the one that has problems with people from other countries, people from other cultures. Whereas in fact, it's asking you kind of to say, like, no, reflect on this. You could be the one making this mistake. You could be the one being the Papa Bear, because Papa Bear's lovable and he's pretty accepting. He's a grump at times, but, we never see him be full-on racist until now. So what is this book? What is the Berenstain Bears New Neighbors? Well, let's take a look. So, some nearby neighbors moved away. Did they? Yes, of course they did. So the book starts out with the Bear family looking across the street. There's a for sale sign on the house across the way. And Mrs. McBear, which is probably the most, what's the word I want to say? The most cliche name for a bear ever, is the local real estate person. And she's pulled up to put a sign on the for sale sign on the house across the way. And a few things I need to point out. First of all, I'm showing images. If you're watching along on YouTube, I'm showing images from the ebook version of this book. But so what we see is the bears gathered at their window, and then the next image is the house across the way. But if you look at the actual book, the way it's presented, this is a 2-page spread. We have the bears looking out their window, but that is actually an insert into a 2-page spread that shows a wide shot of the bears' treehouse, the street, Mrs. McBear pulling up in her roadster, and then the house across the way. And I just wanted to point this out really quickly, because when you get the ebook of these, and nine times out of 10, not always, but a lot of times, the ebook will isolate portions of the image to make for ease of reading, because they isolate the words and they set them next to the images just so you have something to look at, so you're not holding on a static picture, and because the pictures are large spreads and these are for smaller e-readers. But you lose one thing that the Berenstains were such geniuses about, which is layout, which is using their illustrations to guide the eye from one side of the page to the other. So on the left side, you have Mama Bear, Papa Bear, and the kids looking out the window, but they're looking to the right, and your gaze naturally goes to the right, almost as if a camera is now pulling out and getting a larger view of their street, of the sunny dirt road, of the road in front of their house, of the house across the way, a house which we've never seen before. The family who lived there has moved to Big Bear City, and it's had a for sale sign in front of it for a while. And I don't want to dwell on that, but I do want to just point that out, that you lose a little bit of something when you divide these images up. And the big thing you lose is the Berenstains' sense of layout, sense of animation, how they move, how the characters and the camera seems to move in this layout. And I haven't covered a full-on Stan and Jan book in a while, and this is something that I used to point out quite a bit when I was doing it. So it's cool to go back and look at this and really get a taste of the old Stan and Jan. Also get a taste of the old Stan and Jan architecture. So the house across the street that has the for sale sign is a really weird house. And I used to look at this, and I think I pointed this out when I first covered the book, and I know I pointed it out to my kids when I read this book, was I don't understand what this house is. Like, it's this weird round house. It's got like a sort of it's round, and the windows sort of go all the way around it, and has a little like round top on top and stairs leading out. And then like a sort of an exterior hallway that leads to another part of the house. I did not understand this house. So I finally did some homework, looked it up. Let's talk for just a second about the octagon house movement. I'm showing an actual photograph of an octagon house, which looks a heck of a lot like the house in the illustration. Octagon house. What are octagon houses? Were they a real thing? Wherefore? And why? And wherefore? Well, Orson S. Fowler is the name we're going to look at first. Orson S. Fowler was a guy who lived in the 19th century. He was born in 1809. He died in 1887. And he was a phrenologist. That's right. He was part of the phrenology movement, a pseudo-scientific movement that thought that you could look at the shape of a person's head and look at the bumps and know what kind of a person they were. Absolute quackery. This is not anything. Phrenology is also like, you want to get into what's the term I'm looking for? Eugenics? Start with phrenology. But in the 19th century, a lot of people were really into phrenology. A lot of people were also really into amateur architecture. Amateur architecture, amateur geology, amateur science. All of these things were really big. They were like, I'm white and have some free time. I'm going to be an architect without ever going to school. And that's one thing that Fowler here did. He decided, I'm going to be an architect, and I'm going to use my mind, my sciencey mind that believes in phrenology. And he was like a big lecturer in phrenology. Like, people would come to his lectures. He wrote books about it. And I'm going to apply that critical thinking to architecture. I'm just going to think really hard about it. You know what's better than a square? A circle. You know what's really hard to build? A circle. You know what's almost like a circle? An octagon. And you know who's good at doing angles like in an octagon? Builders. They know how to build like window boxes that have like not right angles, but like more obtuse angles. You put that skill to good use, you can make an octagon house, and it's going to be better. You're not going to have the limitations of a square. You're going to get more square footage in the same amount of like land. I guess you're going to get like less, like you're going to lose less heat because of the size of the wall. I don't understand. But also, wood is bad. You shouldn't build houses out of wood. It's going to rot eventually. There's this new thing called concrete that's coming out. Cement, I guess, is a thing. It's like gravel and some lime and some water, and you can make like walls out of this like new material. So you build the house out of that. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of this, so we're still going to use wood. But you build these walls like limestone and like not limestone, like concrete walls, like a lot of gravel. You use gravel and you make some walls out of that. You build a house on top of that. You can make these mansions, these octagon mansions that'll last forever. He wrote a book about it called The Octagon House, and it was a huge seller. And starting in 1850, the octagon house boom began, and it lasted a couple of years, but a lot of these houses were built. A lot of these octagon houses were built. The book included plans for an octagon house, and he built them. In fact, he built his own octagon house that eventually became known as Fowler's Folly. Why? Well, in the 1970s edition of his book, The Octagon House, Madeline B. Stern explained why. What happened was in 1857, there was a panic. There was this huge succession of bank failures, which led to the Panic of 1857. So the octagon house building in general just stopped, like slowed down a lot. And Orson Fowler was one of the people hit by this, so he had to move out of his octagon mansion and rent it out. So he rented it out to a real estate operator named William Riker for $2,500 annually. And at that point, things started going bad for the Fowler octagon mansion. I'm going to read a little bit from the introduction to the Dover edition of the Octagon House, Madeline B. Stern. She says, converted into a boarding house, it was the scene of a typhoid outbreak, partially a result of the cesspool seepage through Orson Fowler's supposedly impermeable gravel walls. In 1859, he sold the house then to his daughter Orsina, who held it only a few months before placing it on the market. Again, because seepage through the impermeable gravel walls of a cesspool, which led to a typhoid outbreak. The octagonal house survived some 4 decades, passing through a series of ill-starred owners. During the Civil War, it was converted by Andreas Cassard into a Cuban institute and military academy. Subsequently, it was again metamorphosed into a boarding house whose proprietrix, one Mrs. Cunningham, was erroneously confused with Mrs. Cunningham, who had been indicted for the murder of the dentist Harvey Burdell, an unfortunate mistake that led her boarders to decamp. By 1880, Fowler's Folly stood empty on its knoll overlooking the Highlands. 10 years later, the youngsters of nearby Wappingers Falls, armed with torches, held what the local press called, quote, a ball in a deserted house, a macabre carnival, a witch's dance. The house, which had been bought and sold on the New York Stock Exchange for reputed sums ranging from $10,000 to $50,000, was now in a state of disrepair. Its broken windows, decayed roof, and rotted verandas heralded the crumbling of its walls. More of a ruin than ever, it was condemned as a, quote, public hazard, and in August 1897, Fowler's Octagon was razed by a few blasts of dynamite supervised by Fred C. Height, demolishing engineer. The builder of the Octagon was spared the sight of its final destruction because Orson Fowler, phrenologist and sex educator, amateur architect whose dicta anticipated those of Frank Lloyd Wright, had died in 1887, 10 years before the death of his ambitious Octagon. And I wanted to point that out because there were octagonal houses all over the place. You can still see them. There's a lot in the Midwest. There's a lot on the East Coast. I believe his was built in Fishkill, which I don't really know where that is. New York. I think it's in New York. His was in New York. Not there anymore. There are a bunch still in New York. You can go see them. Look up Octagon houses. Atlas Obscura has a little chunk of change on a few of those houses. You can go see. Some of them are businesses now. Some of them are residences. Octagon houses. Were they any good? Who knows? Some of them still. I think there's like 2,000 or so still in the United States. So take a look. Octagon houses. But that's what the house is. It's an octagon house, and it's for sale. And there's wait a minute, what's this? Oh, it's sold. That's right. Mrs. McBear tacks a sold sign over the for sale sign, and the Bear family is like, holy cats, looks like somebody bought that house. We're going to get some, quote unquote, new neighbors. So Papa Bear leans out the window, and he's all, this is my favorite part of the book. He's all, hey, Mrs. McBear, looks like that house got sold. Oh, who bought it? Who can we expect to move in? Who are these new neighbors going to be? And Mrs. McBear is all, see you later. She just drives off. And Papa Bear is instantly like, well, that's suspicious. And Mama Bear's like, that's not suspicious. Mrs. McBear just might not know who bought the house. To which I say, I think Papa Bear has a right to be a little suspicious. I think we're allowed to have a little suspicion. I think we should be allowed to have a little bit of suspicion as a treat. Because the woman who sold the house didn't answer your question. You leaned out. Clearly they know that Mrs. McBear you've had neighbors there before. We don't know who they were, but you've had neighbors there before. You've probably leaned out of that window and been like, hey neighbor, how's it going? And they've been like, just fine, Papa Bear, just fine. Instead, this time you're like, hey Mrs. McBear, who bought that house? You would know. You're the real estate agent. To which she responds, goodbye, Papa Bear. Goodbye, goodbye. See you later. Enjoy your new neighbors. And just drives off. That's suspicious. So Papa Bear's got a little suspicion in his heart. He can feel it. It's eating away at him. And Mama Bear's like, she might not know who the neighbors are. She knows who the neighbors are, Mama. That's how selling a house works. Besides, this is public information. Like, you can look this up. Brother Bear, kind of not having it. Brother Bear's talking to Sister Bear, and he's like, I hope that whoever moves into this house has cubs. And Sister's like, especially girls. Can they manifest this happening? My friends, let's find out. Well, the Bears go about their business. They go about their days. Papa on his lathe. Mama in her garden. Brother and sister go to school, and they come back from school. And through all that time, they sit and they wonder who's going to move into that house. Who's going to move into the old house-a-majig? Who's going to be our, quote-unquote, new neighbors? And I want to point out once again that because the layout, the original 2-page spread, has been divided into its component parts, we missed this really cool image of Brother and Sister Bear getting off the bus from school and arrive and it the image of Sister getting off the school bus, she is positioned behind the foreground image of the new neighbor's house, of the octagonal house, the octagon house, which you see Brother and Sister leaning on their porch railing, looking at the house across the street, kind of wistfully wondering, who would these new neighbors be? Will they be young or old? Would they be friendly or would they keep to themselves? And I like the way it's positioned because you see Brother and Sister, and then in the background, like in the distance, you see the house. But behind that, you see their daily comings and goings. And it's just a nice, I don't know. Never forget that Stan and Jan Berenstain were really good at image layout. They're just really good at image layout. And you lose that a little bit. Well, lo and behold, one day, the day arrives when the new neighbors move in. They move into this new house. And who are they? Who are these new neighbors? Well, they're a family. They got cubs. They got 2 girls and a boy. He's kicking a soccer ball around, and Brother's like, hey, let's go over there and play with him. We got new cubs. And the 2 little girls holding hands and waving at Brother and Sister. The little boy is kicking a soccer ball around. There's one thing we know about the cubs. Love soccer. Love holding hands. Love waving. And they have a Papa Bear and a Mama Bear, it looks like. She's carrying in a lamp. The Papa Bear's carrying in like a bookshelf on his back. He's a hard-working bear. I like this. They've got their U-Haul-It. It's not a U-Haul. It's a U-Haul-It truck. They've got a little easy chair. They got a kitchen chair, some tables, or a kitchen table and some chairs, sorry. And they've got a little ramp they've set up leading into their front door. I like that, their back door, I guess, is leading into their back door. I like that little detail that the Berenstains added. Just how are they getting the stuff up? They have a ramp. They rented a ramp from U-Haul-It. So Brother and Sister really want to go over there and take a look. They want to go over there and play with the new cubs. And Mama's like, wait a minute, hold your horses. These people are busy. They're trying to move in. They don't need us going over there and bothering them. They look like a lovely family, but we'll go over later and welcome them. Now, Papa isn't having this at all. He looks across the street and he's like, who do you suppose they are? And what do you suppose they're doing here? Which is a very racist thing to say. Now, let's stop for a moment. You can say, well, what does he mean? What do you mean, Phil? They're racist. How is that racist? What are they doing here? Clearly they bought a house, but also let's talk about this family that's moving in across the street. All we know about them so far is that they are mother, father, 3 kids, 2 little girls and a boy. They've bought the house. They seem to be hardworking, but also they are a family of panda bears. They are pandas, which, as we know, are ancestor, or like they share a common ancestor with brown bears. It's a distant ancestor. The myth used to be that pandas weren't bears. We used to hear that a lot when I was a kid. Pandas aren't bears. They're more closely related to the raccoon family. We know now that's not the case, that pandas are related to modern bears. They share a common ancestor that's more recent than we used to give it credit for. But they are still their own species. They are their own thing. They come from a different part of the world. They have their own dietary habits. They don't cross over much with grizzlies or brown bears, or even like the American black bear, or like the Indian bear, like Indian black bears or brown bears, whatever they're called. Like Baloo. What's Baloo called? He was like an Indian bear. I don't remember what kind of bear he was. In any case, pandas are their own thing. They do their own thing. They come primarily from China, I think, is where the pandas come from. And what we're going to see here is that these bears, when you have panda bears, I believe you're coding them as Chinese, at least Asian, which makes sense in this book. This book is now, what if an Asian family moved across the street from the bear's white? We've talked about this before. Are they white? For all intents and purposes, they are white. They are the Berenstains. They are Stan and Jan Berenstain. Stan, who is of Ukrainian Jewish descent. Jan, who is not. And to all intents and visual purposes, they are of the dominant race, the dominant culture. They are a Christian family, probably white. If not, then all of Beartown is black or whatever. They are the dominant culture. And across the street from them is moving in a bunch of panda bears, an Asian family. And we get Asian, maybe Chinese, from not only the fact that they are panda bears, which is usually coding for Chinese in cartoons and stuff, but also their mode of dress. They seem to be wearing vests and jackets that are, I don't know what you call them. I'm going to look it up. Tangzhuang. I am totally mispronouncing this. It's a Chinese term that means Chinese suit, sometimes called a tang suit. Is that racist? I don't know. I'm just reading it. It's a kind of Chinese jacket with Manchu origins and Han influences, characterized with a mandarin collar, closing at the front with frog buttons. I don't even know what frog buttons are. Panku, also called Chinese frog closure. A decorative toggle. Updated form of the king makwa. Itself a more fashionable adaptation of the riding jacket once worn by Manchu horsemen. Nowadays, the Tangzhuang is one of the main formal clothing worn by Chinese men on various occasions. Overseas, Chinese may also wear it as a form of fashion or to express their cultural identity. And then there's a bunch of images of, it's like men wearing it, but also women wearing it. So we see models wearing it, modern versions of it. So, Tangzhuang? I don't know. I'm bad at this. I'm trying my best. Jackets. So yes, these are coded as Chinese neighbors. I don't know if they're supposed to be from China, but they are definitely wearing culturally appropriate garb in order to indicate that they are from Chinese culture or whatever it's called in Bear World. I'm pointing this out. I'm making a meal of it simply because it's important in the story, and it's nasty of Papa to say, what are they doing here? Now, Mama, not putting up with any of Papa's guff, says, well, I suppose they're the panda family because that's what's just been painted on their mailbox. As for what they're doing, I suppose they're doing the same thing we are. Living here. And Sister's like, don't you like them? And Papa's like, it's not that I don't like them. It's just that they're different. Okay? They're different. And Mama's like, well, different or not, they're our new neighbors. And later today, we're going to welcome them with a jar of our special honey. And she looks at him pointedly when she says that. And I want to congratulate Stan and Jan Berenstain for their drawing of Mama as having none of it. They were very good at drawing Mama with an expression that shuts down the conversation. You know exactly what this expression is. Her face goes blank, and she just looks. And you know Papa's not going to argue with her. And this isn't a way of inappropriately ending the conversation. It's a way of appropriately ending the conversation. In fact, it's a look that many people need to start perfecting more as people get more bold saying garbage like this. Learn to turn on this look. Lower your eyes to half-mast, cross your arms, and go, well, I assume they're doing the exact same thing we're doing here. Living. Practice that. What do you want? What do you suppose those people want? Someone might say to you. Practice it. Cross your arms like Mama, lower your eyes to half-mast like Garfield, and say, well, I suppose these people want what everybody wants. To be happy and to be left to their own devices. I suppose they're doing what we're all doing. Living here. Just practice singing that a few times. You get a lot of good mileage out of it. Well, what do they want? to be left alone, to be treated like people. And Papa, to be fair to him, keeps his big mouth shut. Oh, and there's a great picture of Ms. Panda. I don't know if that's how she goes by. Ms. Panda having painted the Panda family on their mailbox. And Papa keeping his big mouth shut. They're all sitting down to eat. And Mama is continuing to give him the look like, drop it. Drop it, Papa. So, does Papa drop it? I mean, he doesn't get a chance to talk because Mama brings up some interesting points. She's like, you look. Yeah, they're different. You like it when things are different, you dope. When we were buying bulbs for our garden, you were complaining that I wanted to get all yellow tulips. Get different colors, you said, and the Cubs agreed with you. So I got yellow, red, and blue. And what I like is that she says, in quotes, get different colors, which I can only assume means she imitated Papa Bear. And I hope she did. I hope Mama was like, when we were at the bulb farm, you complained when I wanted to buy all yellow tulips. Get different colors, you said. I hope she did it that way. But Papa's not happy that she's bringing this up. Papa's not happy that she's making a point. Papa doesn't say anything. He just kept eating and looking grumpy. And you always use different kinds of wood in your furniture work, she went on. And if we have the same thing for dinner 3 nights in a row, you say, not the same thing again. Why can't we have something different? I just love that Mama's like calling him out. I love that Mama's calling out Papa. He deserves it. Why can't we have something that's different, Mama? Why don't you make dinner one night, Papa? Is what she's thinking, but that's not the argument they're having right now. The argument they're having right now is that Papa doesn't like people who are different, but he sure does seem to like things that are different when they satisfy him. He doesn't want chicken and carrots and moosh every night. He wants chickens and carrots and moosh one night, but then the next night he wants burger and corn and peas. And then the next night he wants fish and green beans and radishes, which is wild because nobody wants radishes. But Papa does. He'd rather have something different than something delicious. How does Papa take having his own reality thrown back in his face? That's different. That's what he says. Just look at that, would you? And he goes to the window. I also want to point out that they've had to add a little bit of foot here at the bottom because in the original illustration, his foot is cut off. It's the price you pay. So sometimes when you get these ebooks, you get a little more illustration because someone had to go in and draw some toesies on old Poppy there. That's the most disgusting thing I've ever said. He looks out the window and he's like, look at what they're doing. Before you start giving away all of our special honey, I think you should have a look at what our new neighbors are doing. They've hardly even moved in and they're building a fence. A spite fence. And I had to look up spite fence, not now, but I had to look up spite fence a long time ago because I was like, I think you just made that up, Papa. Turns out he didn't. Turns out, and you might know this, a spite fence is a real thing. It's a thing that a neighbor builds to shut out the rest of the neighborhood. To say, like, I don't want to have any part of you, and to shut out the neighborhood. So we have this great picture of Papa looking out the window, hands on hips, angry, at the Panda family building a spite fence. And then the next illustration is Papa turning back to his family and pointing out the window with angry eyes at them building their fence. He has this look on his face like the Beast has in Beauty and the Beast when the dishes, I don't know, the inanimate objects are like, you need to go in there and make a friends with her. And so he knocks on the door and he's like, would you let me in the room? And Belle's all, go away. And the Beast does this thing where he looks and he points over his shoulder at the door. That's what Papa's doing. In case you're having trouble picturing it, if you're not watching this on YouTube, which you should be, because you get to see all these beautiful illustrations. So Papa's like, they're building a spite fence. And Sister's like, what's a spite fence? Is that even a real thing? And he's like, it's a fence that bad neighbors put up just for spite. They do it just to be mean and to keep decent folks from seeing what they're up to. He really lays it into her. He's like, you can't trust people in those jackets and those facial features. Basically is what he's saying. We've never seen Papa like this, by the way, because he's never dealt with something like this. But hasn't he? Let's go back in time. This isn't a new thing. Papa has reacted this way to new neighbors in the past. He reacted that way when the beavers moved in. He reacted that way when the neighborly skunk moved in. And he reacted that way when it looked like the rabbits might move in. And what did he say about them? He said, the rabbits have too many kids, the beavers work too hard, and skunks stink. And this is the problem with this whole thing. There's no race in Beartown. There's no race in bear country. We know this. They did not have an equivalent of the African slave trade. I hate to keep bringing that up, but it's true. And it's the African slave trade that defined race in America. Like literally, like defined race in America. Like consciously, people who were benefiting from that made it a point that this is a different race of people. Like that was the thing. That was the birth of like modern anti-black racism in America. It was a conscious choice made for capitalistic reasons. That doesn't exist in Bear World. There was no African slave trade. Their version of Civil War was not fought over slavery. It was fought over Family Feud, I guess. And so racism, for all intents and purposes, doesn't exist. However, we've seen that specism does exist. Papa is very specious when it comes to his neighbors. He doesn't trust he doesn't trust the rabbits not to have too many kids. He doesn't trust the beavers not to work too hard and make him look bad. And he doesn't trust the skunk not to stink. The problem with this, and it's something we see in like modern stories that try to do it as well. Like take a look at Zootopia, which essentially falls into the same trap. There was a movie with Will Smith about America, LA cops, but in a world where like fantasy creatures coexisted. That exists. Bright, I think it was called, which used the same basic concept, only instead of racism, it was like, you know, like fairies and elves and stuff like that. The problem with that, X-Men is another example of it not quite working, which is racism is a huge problem and should be addressed. The problem with racism, one of the problems with racism, for there are many, is that you're making assumptions about people and you're judging people and you're limiting their options, you're limiting their choices, a lot of times limiting their like civil rights based on erroneous, non-scientific classification of them. You're saying these people are inferior to me. These people are less than human to me because of their color of their skin, because of the look of their faces, because of the clothes they wear, etc., etc. And these presumptions, these bigoted statements, these prejudicial choices are absolutely incorrect. They might point, well, look at this population, the crime rate is higher. And you're like, well, it's not because of the color of their skin. That's not because of the country they came from. It's because of the disadvantages that are baked into our system, because the capitalist system made it that way to keep them oppressed, and thus they grow up into that system. And their culture develops within that system, which gives them nothing but disadvantages, and thus leads to them having to react to the outside world, outside of their community, as was set up for them. It's complicated. I mean, I'm not an expert on this, but I'm smart enough to see that. The problem with using animals or fairies or elves or whatever as stand-ins for this, mutants in X-Men, is that those characters are different. Like those characters are fundamentally different. A beaver, as we saw in the book, does work very hard, harder than a bear. Why? Because it's a beaver and they are biologically inclined to build and never stop building. A rabbit does reproduce far more than a bear because they're rabbits and their reproductive cycles take a lot less time, and they have litters of rabbit. I don't know what you call gaggles of rabbit. What do you call a bunch of baby rabbits? I don't know. Dinner is what I call them. Soup. Sorry. I don't eat rabbit soup. Rabbits do have a lot more kids and reproduce very quickly because they're rabbits. A skunk, guess what? Does spray a stinky substance, a musk, and does tend to smell like its own musk a lot because when it sprays, it gets the musk on itself. Skunks do smell bad because that's what skunks do. They do that for defensive reasons. Mutants are a threat because some of them can control your mind, because some of them can walk through walls, because some of them can shoot razors out of their knuckles, because some of them can kill you with a thought, control all of metal, look like anyone they want to. Mutants are not just oppressed individuals. They are a possible threat. When you discriminate against someone for the color of their skin and you're like, they're dangerous, you're just telling on yourself. However, if a person with a different skin color could blow up your family just by thinking about it, like if they got mad, okay, you'd have something to worry about. But you don't, because that's not true. So Papa's like, those people are different across the street. And you know what? They are different, because pandas and brown bears aren't the same thing, and they do things differently. So I just wanted to say that that's the problem with when children's books do this. If they focus on the differences of the different species and try to use it as a way of like, we're all the same deep down, they do have to come back around to saying, we're not all the same deep down. Zootopia is like, we'll make the predators, the underclass, like the discriminated class, and people will be afraid of them because they could go crazy and start killing each other or killing us. And come to find out in Zootopia, that's actually true. If you eat the wrong berry, I think it was, like they'll start going nuts and killing people. There's no equivalent of that in the world, in our world, because we're all the same species. We're all just people. That's the problem with it. So Papa sees these other bears across the street and it's like, that's a different type of bear. And you know what they are. Now Papa's wrong about some things, but the lesson he learns ends up being kind of weird. Let's find out what's going on. So he's like, that's what a spite fence is. A spite fence means that they're bad people. Right? Bad people. And Mama's like, you're being ridiculous. You're being a ding-dong. She's like, look, they're building a fence. I'm sure there's an explanation. I don't even know why Mama says I'm sure there's an explanation. I think the explanation is they're building a fence. Like, that's not unheard of. Maybe there aren't that many fences in Bear Town, but it's not unheard of. And besides, good fences, say it with me, they make good neighbors. Papa's like, and not giving away our good honey. I was going to save it for a special occasion. And she's like, new neighbors are a special occasion. Meanwhile, the Cubs have just gone across the street and they're like, hey, we're Cubs. You know, we don't see differences the same way our bigoted parents do. Who are y'all? How y'all doing? What's up? How you doing? And the Cubs, the little boys, like, I'm Peter Panda. I love that brother's like, we live in that big treehouse across the road. Like, yeah, it's 10 yards away. We saw you come out the front door. We live there. Peter Panda's like, I'm Peter Panda. These are my sisters, Pam and Patty. Peter Pan and Patty Panda. We love alliteration, right? Berenstain Bears. That's alliterative, I guess. The Cubs sit around. They just talk. They love talking. They love chatting. These kids are great. These Cubs are great. Can't wait to see more of them in the future. These Cubs are great. They're all talking about things Cubs. Okay, pretty soon, one and all, we're busy talking about the things Cubs talk about. Finance, the stock market, finance. I can't think of anything else that Cubs don't talk about. What do kids not talk about? Geopolitics, global warming. And then, you know what they do? They start doing what they do. Playing soccer ball. There's this great shot of Peter showing them some soccer moves. And again, soccer ball, not the most American of sports. We learned that in the soccer book where Papa's like, soccer, what's a soccer ball? Peter Panda knows a lot about soccer ball because in countries other than Bear Country, they play soccer ball a lot. So Peter's like, you can put your foot on the soccer ball. And there's a great shot of Peter Panda heading the ball, like bouncing it off of his head. And if you isolate just because it's like there's a picture of Peter with the soccer ball, and then below is Peter heading the soccer ball. But if you isolate, if you took away, because the ball is bouncing off his head and is actually going through the image, like over the image above them. It's actually a very nice illustration. But I was looking at it, I was like, if you just looked at Peter, if you cover up the top part of it, it looks like Peter is levitating himself and his hypnotized brother. It's just a great image, and I'm a big fan of it. I'm going to isolate it myself and maybe use it as my profile picture. I don't know. It's fun when it's fun. So Peter's showing him some stuff. Brother's like, hey, I got some soccer moves. Also, and I got some football moves, and I'll learn them to you. I'll show them to you how to do them. I'll draw them onto a paper and show them to you with a stick. And Peter's like, heck yeah. All right. They're getting along fine. Sister's like, you guys like to jump the rope? I got jump the rope skills all over the place. We did a whole book about it. Phil Gonzalez told us the whole history of jumping the rope. It was this whole thing where it was thought up as a way of training military men. I remember jump rope has a weird history. You guys like double dutch? Man, I can show you guys double dutch. I know the whole history of double dutch. It's an insult, based on racism against Dutch people. You guys know what racism's like, right? Because you're about to meet my papa. They worked up a sweat jumping that rope. Finally, brother's like, so what's with this spite fence? Brother's like, why'd you build this hate fence? Why are you hating? Why are you hating on us? Why do you hate us so much? Why'd you build this fence to show what terrible people you are? Why'd you build the fence against your neighbors? And Peter's like, that ain't a spite fence, man. It's bamboo because, well, he says bamboo's our favorite thing to eat. It's our favorite food. I guess they've evolved past it being the only thing they eat. So one of the problems with pandas, and if you want to know more about pandas, look up Casual Geographic's YouTube videos on when he talks about pandas, because he talks about pandas a lot. Because pandas are animals that should not be alive. They shouldn't exist because they are the worst at living. They only eat one thing. They eat bamboo, which hardly provides enough calories to get through the day. And I don't want to be crude, but the fact that the panda family has 3 kids is a bit of a miracle. And I'm going to assume that 2 of those kids were adopted because pandas don't know how to have sex. I don't want to be crude. They don't know how to do it. They're bad at doing it. If they think they're being looked at or watched, or they think that the weather's not quite right, they'll just stop and won't do it, no matter how endangered their species is. Pandas are really bad at reproducing, particularly if they live indoors, which is what these pandas do. They have an octagon house. But he's like, no, this isn't a fence. It's our bamboo. This is what we eat. We love to eat. My mom, she has so many great bamboo recipes. And Peter Panda, I'm right there with you. Bamboo is pretty tasty. You have it in your Chinese food. Bamboo's pretty tasty. She has all kinds of great recipes. No bamboo recipes in any of those Berenstain Bears cooking books we looked at. But they should have been, because apparently it's pretty good. So he's like, this isn't a fence at all. It's just our bamboo. And I'm like, that makes sense. Except I do want to point out that you're growing your bamboo. You've planted your bamboo in a very fence-like shape, it being a fence that has fenced in your property. And if you didn't want it to look like a fence, maybe look at what fences look like and then be like, we'll just build the bamboo, because we got a lot of land here. I'm looking at the picture and there's a lot of property. We'll just build the bamboo a little further back, or maybe not just directly in front of the sidewalk so it looks like a fence. I'm just saying. Again, not an expert, but I do know what a fence looks like. And what a fence looks like is what your bamboo looks like. So yeah, so Peter explains it's not a spite fence. It's just a bamboo. And brother's like, well, our favorite food is honey. And we're going to bring you some later in a jar. Way to spoil it, brother. We're going to bring you some of our best honey in a jar. Don't be surprised, brother, if the pandas don't eat it. They eat one thing. They eat bamboo. And that's true. So Mama shows up with her jar of honey. And the pandas are thrilled. They're thrilled to see them. They're like, you know what? We're going to have neighbors over. We're going to have neighbors over soon. But why don't you guys stick around? We'll try your honey. We'll have some bread. We've traveled all over the world. Or Mr. Panda has traveled all over the world. He's a very interesting fellow. Have some chilled bamboo juice that we put up. It's great. They sit around. They chat with the pandas. They get to know each other. They really enjoy hanging out with the pandas, chatting up with Mr. Panda. I like that Mr. Panda is shorter than Papa. These are a different species of bear. Pandas are a little tinier than brown bears. They make a point of showing that. They sit around, they drink chilled bamboo juice, they eat honey on bread, they have a good time, or they serve honey on bread. I don't know if the pandas actually eat it. They might not. It might not be edible for them. That's something we're going to have to learn a bit more about later, but Mama, being Mama and being a decent human being, or human bear, Hugh Bear Being, has a neighborhood smash, a neighborhood get together, a welcome at the community center, which means she reserved the spot that next weekend. It was a potluck. She had a covered dish, as they call it, a covered dish supper, because this isn't the Midwest. And Mrs. Panda's barbecued bamboo shoots were the hit of the evening. And the last illustration of this book is weird, because it's all the bears in Beartown who were invited in the neighborhood, who've come to this gathering, shoveling barbecue bamboo in their face, not looking at each other, not talking, just going, at the bamboo. Literally, that's what's happening. They're all staring straight ahead. They're standing up with plates of barbecue bamboo, going, And dead center in the picture is Mrs. Panda, who's made the bamboo, looking pissed off. I hate to say it. She looks TO'd. Like her arms are crossed. She's not smiling. She has angry eyes. She looks really put off. Like that everyone's sitting around enjoying her barbecue bamboo. And Mama is giving her a look like, you little so-and-so. You little whatchamacall. You did something. You put something in the bamboo. You put something in the bamboo. You put something in the barbecue bamboo, lady. Or something. I don't know. It's a weird picture. She's not smiling. She doesn't look happy. It doesn't look like she got what she wanted out of this. Everyone's just standing around eating. They're not talking to anyone. They probably don't even know who made the bamboo. Papa's enjoying it. It looks like delicious noodles, by the way. I really enjoy the bamboo. On the list of food that Stan and Jan Berenstain have drawn that looks like something you just want to shovel into your mouth, the barbecue bamboo shoots look amazing. I want a recipe. Is there a recipe? Hold on. Barbecue bamboo shoots. Grilled bamboo shoots recipe. Grilling bamboo shoots. All about Japanese bamboo shoots. You can grill them on the barbecue, but I don't see anything with sauce on them. I see a stir fry, but that's a stir fry. Barbecue bamboo shoots. I mean, I guess you can put some kind of sauce on them, but I don't see a recipe for the sauce. If you're listening, let me know. What kind of sauce do you put on barbecued bamboo shoots? How do you go about what's your favorite recipe for barbecue bamboo shoots? Is it a thing? I don't know. But that's the way the book ends. They're all enjoying the barbecue bamboo shoots. Now, I used to have a lot more problems with this book. I'm older now. I've learned a lot more about the neighborhood. One thing that's cool about this book that I actually used to have a problem with was that it seemed like Papa only ended up liking the neighbors because he liked the food they made. But food is a great way to meet people. Sharing food is like the way people meet each other. It's like, historically speaking, I mean, going back thousands of years, if you sit at someone's table and eat the food they prepared, that's like the beginning of neighbors, beginning of neighborliness. That is what neighbors are. That's like the first rule of being a guest and being a host, is serving people your food and enjoying another person's food. I understand if they have food you can't eat, but that's like the way to a person's heart and soul. You can't deny good food. And so I used to have a problem, because I used to say, in the end of it, Papa just likes them because he likes he likes their food. But I forget that Papa is standing having a conversation with Mr. Panda. I said up top that I really liked that Papa Bear was the focus of this book, that Papa was the racist. Papa was the one who didn't trust the new Chinese neighbors. He didn't trust what they were doing. He didn't trust the way they looked. He didn't trust the way they dressed. They don't even talk really about the way they dress, but they are dressed in these jackets. But I think that's the book's strength. I think the strength of the book is Papa Bear being the focus, because Anyone can be racist. Any of us can do this. Any of us can look out the window and see people we don't know and immediately start thinking the worst, or immediately be like, who are they and what do they want? Why are they here? What are they trying to do here? And even though Mama is the voice of reason, it takes that extra effort to bridge that gap for Papa Bear. He's not, it just takes him a while. It takes him a while to come around. And is that a fault of Papa's? Yeah, it is. Is that a flaw? Yes, but you have to remember that the bears are only surrounded by people who look like them. And when I say people who look like them, I mean people who look exactly like them. That's the way the bear world is. Everyone just looks the same. And to have people who are of a different species, who are recognizably bears but don't look like the other bears, is a culture shock for Papa. It's a bigger culture shock, I'm sure, for the panda family. But for Papa, it's huge. And the cubs are able to see past it because they're cubs and they just want to have friends to play with. Mama's able to see past it because she's more enlightened, she's better educated, and she's smarter, and she's more open. Papa's a more closed off person. He doesn't trust things. He didn't trust soccer when it first showed up. We saw he didn't trust having beavers around or having skunks around. Papa is harder to get through to. That's not the important part. The important part is that Papa is capable of getting through to. Papa will listen. It'll take a while, but Papa will eventually approach people based on who they are and not his preconceived notions of them. And I think that's what the Berenstains are trying to say. Look, you're going to be racist. You're going to make assumptions about people based on stupid things that probably shouldn't be what you make assumptions about them on. You probably shouldn't make assumptions about people. When you assume, you make a butt out of everybody. But you're going to. And what this book is saying is that let those assumptions happen. Let them sink in. And then move past them. Like, look at your neighbors. Get to know them as people. And don't just sit there making assumptions about them. I can't remember who said it. Who was it that basically said, like, it doesn't matter what your first thoughts are about something. That's not, your first thought is like, is how you were raised, is your past. It's your second and third thoughts that are who you are. So if your first thought is, I don't know what those people are. They look weird. They dress weird. They're doing weird things. I don't know if I should trust them. If that's your first thought, great. Because that is everything that happened to you growing up and all of your experiences build up to that first thought. It's the second thought. It's that's unfair. I should get to know those people. That's more who you are. And then what you do is especially who you are. It's the next steps. It's okay if your first thoughts are uncharitable because your first thoughts don't define you. Your second and third, fourth and fifth thoughts define you. And definitely what you do is what defines you. Don't be your first thought. Be your later thoughts. Listen, meet people, love your neighbors, your new neighbors, your old neighbors. We need each other's love and trust right now. We need people to look out their windows and go, these people live near me. I may not know them, but they're my neighbors and they belong here just as much as I do. I'm bad. I'm a bad neighbor. I am bad at meeting people. I get worked up, and freaked out about new people. I assume because of my first thoughts that people aren't interested in getting to know me, that people don't want to talk to me, that people don't like me automatically because they see me coming and they want nothing to do with this boy, this weird looking boy, the boy. That's what the voice in my head tells me. Don't bother those people. They are superior to you in every way. And I have to work all the time not to be that person, which is why my job at the Brain Injury Alliance is so important because I have to meet new people. I have to get to know new people because I interview them and write about them. But that's the point. I thought this was going to be a much harder book to cover. The new neighbors, the panda family, are immigrants of sorts into bear world of sorts. They may not be coming from another country. We don't know. We don't get that background. We know that their father has traveled the world, whatever that means. They may not be immigrants to the nation, but they are immigrants to the neighborhood. And as such, they are treated like that. They are treated as if they are new and interesting and maybe objectified a little bit. There's that too. Like, welcome your new neighbors in. Don't other them in your attempts to welcome them. Don't be like, ooh, you're so fascinating. What's with the clothes? What's with the bamboo? What's with the food? That's great. What's that smell? Oh, what's with the decoration? Don't other them, because we're all coming from different places. I'm not trying to be Mr. Rogers here. But the panda family, now they are our neighbors. Now they live across the street. Now we are going to see them in every book going for, oh wait, we didn't? What was that? Oh, we didn't see the panda family after this. 1994, and I've covered up through when? 2024. Okay, yeah, no, that makes sense. I haven't covered the panda family. When was that? Oh, ever again. Okay, so 20 years have gone by, and I didn't see them. Okay. Do they show back? Oh, they do. Oh, there's a book I haven't covered that has them? Okay. Oh, I skipped that book. That makes sense. I skipped that book because it dealt with the panda. Okay. Yes, I skipped a book from a few years ago because it dealt directly with the panda family, and I haven't talked about them yet. But yes, they then get written completely out of the main series. We never see them in the main series until much later when Mike starts like, let's go back and get some of these old characters back into the mix. So Peter Panda, and that's a shame because they are visually interesting characters. They dress in a visually interesting way. And there's 3 kids. We need more kids. Peter Panda, Patty and Selma, whatever her name is. They're right there, and they should be used more. So because I like them. I like their color scheme. I like the way their jackets are. And brother needs someone to hang out with besides cousin Fred. So the Berenstain Bears New Neighbors, we'll be catching back up with them really soon. But first, did you know that this book was adapted into an episode of the PBS show? Did you know that it was the first episode of season 3 and also the first episode that did not feature Michael Cera as Brother Bear? Did you know that? Should I cover it? Well, I will be. But you're going to have to watch YouTube to see the episode about the Berenstain Bears and the New Neighbors, or the New Neighbors. Is it like this book? Is it actually based on this book? Is it about the panda family? Do they show up? You're going to have to tune into YouTube to see me cover it. I'm going to cover it. Maybe I'll do a watch along. Who knows? But thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching. If you're watching, hit that like and subscribe button, or like and subscribe, hit that button. I don't know what the YouTubers say. I've gotten a lot of new people, a lot of new guesties, a lot of new friends watching my show on YouTube. So watch it and like and subscribe because it's fun. And I like it when you do, and you make little comments sometimes, and sometimes they're rude, and sometimes they're weird, and sometimes they're a little bit mean, but I don't care because I'm almost 50 years old. I can handle it. So don't be mean, please. For God's sake, don't be mean. And I'll see you all next time, deep in Bear Country.